The crystal vase my late husband gave me for our 40th anniversary shattered against the kitchen wall, missing my head by inches. That's what happens when you don't listen, old woman. You're nothing but a servant in this house now, my house. So either you serve Jessica like the help you are, or pack your bags and disappear quietly. I stood there, trembling hands pressed against my apron, watching my son's cold eyes that once looked at me with love. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I never thought we'd cross. Thank you for being here with me tonight. If this story reaches you, please stay until the very end. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me which country you're listening from. I need to know my voice is traveling beyond these walls where I've suffered in silence for too long. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 67 years old, and I'm standing in the kitchen of the house my husband built with his own hands 45 years ago. The house where I raised 3 children, buried my dreams, and apparently lost my son's heart to a woman who sees me as nothing more than an obstacle to her perfect life. But this moment didn't happen overnight. To understand how my own flesh and blood could look me in the eye and call me a servant, I need to take you back to where it all began. 3 months ago, when death knocked on our door and changed everything forever. Robert collapsed in this very kitchen on a Tuesday morning. One moment he was drinking his coffee, telling me about the garden he wanted to plant in spring. The next, he was gone. 45 years of marriage ended with the sound of his coffee cup hitting the floor. The funeral felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I stood beside his casket in my black dress. The one Robert said made my eyes look beautiful, and watched as people I barely knew offered empty condolences. But it wasn't the strangers that broke my heart that day. It was watching Marcus walk in with her. Jessica, 28 years old, blonde hair perfectly styled even for a funeral, designer heels clicking against the church floor like a countdown to my destruction. She had attached herself to my eldest son's arm, like she owned him, and maybe she did. Marcus hadn't visited in 2 years before his father died, but suddenly he was here, and he'd brought this woman who looked at our family home like she was already measuring it for new curtains. During the service, while I wept for the man who'd loved me for 45 years, Jessica whispered in Marcus's ear about updating traditions and making necessary changes. I heard every poisonous word through my grief, but I said nothing. I thought it was just the shock talking, that once the funeral was over, they'd leave, and I could mourn in peace. I was so wrong. After we buried Robert, Jessica cornered me in my own living room. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Marcus and I have been talking. This house is far too big for just you now. Have you considered downsizing?" I watched from the staircase as Jessica measured my living room with her phone, whispering into it about prime real estate and getting the old bat out. She had no idea I was listening, or that I was recording every word. 2 weeks after the funeral, Marcus announced they'd be staying temporarily to help with arrangements. I should have known then that temporary would stretch into forever, or at least until they got what they came for. Jessica moved through my home like a hurricane. She rearranged furniture that Robert and I had chosen together, claiming the old placement was inefficient. She threw away my treasured belongings, calling them clutter that made the house look dated and depressing. "Eleanor, you really should let me handle the cooking from now on," she announced one morning, standing in my kitchen wearing my apron. "You seem so tired lately. Why don't you just sit and rest while I take care of things?" But rest meant watching her serve breakfast on my grandmother's china, the set I'd protected for 30 years. It meant listening to her answer my phone calls and tell callers that Eleanor isn't feeling well enough for visitors right now. Marcus said nothing. My son, who I'd carried for 9 months and raised with every ounce of love I possessed, stood silent while this woman erased me from my own life. "Mom, Jessica's just trying to help," he'd say when I tried to protest. "Maybe it's time you let someone else make the decisions for a while." The decisions. Like when Jessica decided my late mother's jewelry was too old-fashioned and would look better stored away. Like when she decided the master bedroom needed updating and began moving her clothes into Robert's closet while his suit still hung there, still smelling like his cologne. I started noticing other things disappearing. Small things at first: a silver picture frame, my grandmother's thimble, Robert's favorite coffee mug. When I asked about them, Jessica would look confused and suggest that grief was making me forgetful. "It's perfectly normal for older people to misplace things," she'd say with that patronizing smile. "Maybe we should start making lists to help you remember where you put things." Marcus nodded along, his eyes avoiding mine. "Jessica's right, Mom. You have been seeming a bit scattered lately." They were researching property values. I found the printed pages hidden under Jessica's pillow when I was changing the sheets, my sheets in my bedroom, that she'd somehow claimed as her own. Pages and pages of comparable sales, inheritance tax information, and something that made my stomach turn: articles about elderly competency evaluations. When I found my wedding ring drawer empty, and Jessica wearing my late mother's pearl earrings at breakfast, I knew they weren't planning to leave. They were planning to erase me entirely. That night, alone in what used to be my guest room, I made a decision. If they thought I was becoming forgetful and confused, then maybe it was time to find out exactly what they were planning. And to do that, I needed to search the one place Robert always kept his most important papers: the locked drawer in his desk that he'd never let anyone touch. I waited until they left for one of their mysterious errands, trips that always seemed to involve lawyers or real estate agents. With shaking hands, I found Robert's hidden key behind the family photo on his desk, the same place he'd kept it for 20 years. What I found inside that drawer changed everything. Robert's will was there, but not the version Marcus and Jessica thought existed. This was the real will, written just 6 months before Robert died, when he'd started noticing Marcus's growing distance and Jessica's calculating looks during their rare visits. The house was in a trust that meant no one could touch it, sell it, or force me to leave it as long as I lived. Robert had protected me in ways I never knew, probably sensing that our children might not have my best interests at heart after he was gone. But there was more. A life insurance policy, worth more than Jessica could ever imagine, payable only to me, bank accounts she didn't know existed, and tucked behind everything else, a stack of letters in Robert's handwriting. Letters he'd written to me but never gave me, pouring out his fears about our children's greed and his determination to make sure I'd be safe. "My dearest Eleanor," one letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're facing troubles I hoped you'd never have to face. But know this, I've made sure you're protected. The house is yours alone, and no one can take it from you. I've seen the way Marcus looks at money, and I've seen the way that woman looks at our home. Don't let them fool you into thinking you're helpless. You're the strongest person I've ever known." I sat in Robert's chair, tears streaming down my face, reading his words of love and protection. But even as my heart swelled with gratitude for his foresight, I could hear Jessica's voice echoing from the kitchen above. She was on the phone again, and this time I could hear every word. "Yes, I understand the process for incompetency hearings. How long does it typically take, and what kind of evidence do you need?" My blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to steal my home, they were planning to steal my freedom. The business card that fell from Jessica's purse made my blood run cold. Elder law attorney, specializing in incompetency cases. They weren't just trying to steal my home. They were planning to steal my freedom. I knew I had to act fast, but I also knew I had to be smart. If Jessica was building a case that I was mentally incompetent, then I needed to build a stronger case that she was the one committing crimes. I called Robert's attorney, Mr. Peterson, the next morning while Jessica and Marcus were out. His voice was warm with sympathy when I explained the situation, but it turned cold with anger when I told him about Jessica's inquiries. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this," he said. "But I'm not surprised. Miss Jessica Thompson contacted my office 3 weeks ago, asking about challenging your mental capacity and taking control of your affairs. I refused to help her, of course, but I fear she's found other legal counsel." He confirmed what I'd discovered in Robert's desk. The house was completely protected, and I had far more financial security than Jessica realized. But he also confirmed my worst fears. "She's been very thorough in documenting what she claims are signs of your declining mental state. Every time you've seemed tired, confused, or upset, she's been taking notes. She's building a case to have you declared incompetent and committed to a care facility." That's when I realized I had to become an actress. If Jessica wanted to see a confused, helpless old woman, then that's exactly what I'd give her. But while she thought she was manipulating me, I'd be gathering evidence that would destroy her. I started small. I'd forget where I put things, then act grateful when Jessica found them for me. I'd seem confused about simple tasks, letting her take over more and more of the household management. And all the while, I was installing tiny recording devices in every room. Devices David Chen, Mrs. Peterson's grandson, who worked in elder care advocacy, had helped me obtain. Document everything. David had advised during our secret meeting at the library. Her verbal abuse, her theft, her manipulation of your son. We need ironclad proof of what she's really doing. Jessica grew bolder as she thought I grew weaker. She started selling my possessions online. I found the listings on her laptop when she left it open. My mother's jewelry, Robert's tools, even the china set my grandmother had passed down. She was liquidating my life piece by piece while convincing Marcus it was for my own good. Your mother doesn't need all this clutter, I heard her tell him one night. It's just confusing her, making her more anxious. We're helping her by simplifying her environment. I documented every sale, every theft, every cruel comment, and I started leaving little traps, mentioning non-existent valuables hidden around the house, then watching Jessica tear through closets and drawers looking for them. But my blood truly ran cold when I found the commitment papers hidden in her purse, already signed by a doctor I'd never met, just waiting for Marcus's signature as my next of kin. When Jessica's lawyer friend arrived for dinner, and I overheard them discussing the perfect facility where I'd be much happier, I knew their timeline had moved up. They were planning to have me committed within the week. The next morning, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with tears in her eyes. At 80 years old, my neighbor had been watching everything unfold with growing horror. "Eleanor dear, I've been documenting what that woman has been doing to you," she whispered, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "The way she screams at you when she thinks no one's listening, the way she's been telling the whole neighborhood that you're losing your mind. I've been taking notes, and I've been recording some of it too." Mrs. Chen introduced me to her grandson David, who specialized in elder abuse cases. David was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that reminded me of Marcus before Jessica poisoned him against me. "Mrs. Whitmore, what's happening to you is textbook elder abuse," David explained. "The isolation, the financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation, and now they're planning forced commitment. But you're not helpless. We can stop this." David helped me understand my legal rights and began building a case against Jessica and Marcus. He also revealed something that made my stomach turn. Jessica had already contacted 3 different memory care facilities, shopping for the cheapest one that would take me with the least amount of questions asked. But David had also been investigating Jessica herself, and what he found was chilling. "She's done this before, Mrs. Whitmore. We found at least 2 other elderly victims in neighboring states. She befriends their adult children, moves in to help, then systematically strips them of their assets before having them committed. It's a calculated pattern." Through David's network, I met other families Jessica had destroyed. An 82-year-old widower whose daughter Jessica had seduced, only to steal his life savings and have him committed for wandering in confusion. A 75-year-old woman whose son Jessica convinced to sign over power of attorney before disappearing with everything. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my own freedom. I was fighting to stop a predator who saw elderly people as easy targets. The morning I found the signed commitment papers hidden in Jessica's purse, I realized I had less than 48 hours before they'd have me locked away forever. But they had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated a mother's rage. It was time to spring my trap. I spent the next day giving the performance of my lifetime. I shuffled around the house, acting more confused than ever, muttering about Robert's secret hiding place and the money he saved for emergencies. Jessica's eyes lit up with greed. "What money, Eleanor? Where did Robert hide it?" I looked at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, I shouldn't tell anyone. He made me promise. But since you're going to take such good care of me," I leaned in conspiratorially. "There's a safe behind the family photo in his study. He kept all our emergency money there and some very valuable things my mother left me." That night, I heard Jessica and Marcus whispering excitedly about the hidden safe. They had no idea that the safe they'd find was empty and that their attempt to open it would be their downfall. I made a phone call to David. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Everything will be ready. The next morning, Jessica could barely contain her excitement. She'd already called her lawyer friend, ostensibly to help Eleanor with some financial paperwork, but really to witness what she thought would be her final victory. "Eleanor, dear," Jessica said in her sickeningly sweet voice, "Marcus and I think it's time to open Robert's safe and make sure your valuables are properly secured. For your protection, of course." I nodded obediently. "Of course, dear. Anything you think is best." We gathered in Robert's study. Jessica, Marcus, the lawyer, and me. Jessica had even brought a locksmith, claiming it was to help poor Eleanor, who couldn't remember the combination. "Now, Eleanor," Jessica said, her mask of kindness starting to slip in her eagerness, "open the safe so we can take care of everything for you." I smiled at her, and for the first time in months, it was a genuine smile. "Of course, dear. But first, let me introduce you to some friends who've been waiting to meet you." When Jessica finally found what she thought was Robert's hidden safe and demanded I open it in front of her lawyer, I smiled and said the words that would destroy her. "Of course, dear. But first, let me introduce you to some friends who've been waiting to meet you." The door opened, and David walked in, followed by Detective Rodriguez from the Elder Abuse Unit, Mr. Peterson with a briefcase full of legal documents, and Mrs. Chen carrying a folder thick with evidence. Jessica's face went white. "What? What is this?" "This," I said, standing straighter than I had in months, "is justice." Detective Rodriguez stepped forward. "Jessica Thompson, you're under arrest for elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment." "You can't be serious," Jessica shrieked, her mask finally dropping completely. "This old bat is senile. She doesn't know what she's saying." I pulled out my phone and played back her own voice. "Yes, I understand the process for incompetency hearings. How long does it typically take?" Her lawyer friend tried to back toward the door, but David blocked his path. "Mr. Stevens, you're also under arrest for conspiracy and fraud. Did you really think we wouldn't investigate the doctor who signed those commitment papers without ever examining Mrs. Whitmore?" Marcus stood frozen, finally understanding the depth of Jessica's manipulation. "Mom, I didn't know." "You knew enough," I said quietly. "You knew she was selling my possessions. You knew she was isolating me from my friends. You knew she was trying to erase me from my own life. And you helped her do it." Mr. Peterson opened his briefcase. "Jessica, every document you forged, every signature you faked, every item you sold, we have records of all of it. Mrs. Whitmore has been recording your crimes for weeks." David presented evidence of Jessica's previous victims, financial records showing the money she'd stolen, and detailed documentation of her pattern of targeting vulnerable seniors. As Detective Rodriguez handcuffed Jessica, I felt a calm satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. "The safe you wanted me to open," I said softly. "It's been empty for 20 years. Robert moved all our valuables to a bank security deposit box when we first bought this house. He was always smarter than people gave him credit for." Jessica's facade crumbled completely as they led her away. She screamed threats and curses, calling me names that would have devastated me months ago, but now just seemed pathetic. Marcus stood in the wreckage of his greed, finally seeing what his mother had tried to protect him from. As they led Jessica away in handcuffs, she screamed one last threat that made my blood freeze. "You think this is over? Marcus is still your son, and I know secrets about this family that will destroy you all." But her secrets were just more lies, and I was done being afraid. With Jessica in custody, I faced the hardest confrontation of all with my son. Marcus slumped in Robert's chair, his face in his hands. The confident man who'd walked into my house 3 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and broken. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know she was up. I thought you were actually getting confused." She showed me all these examples of you forgetting things, being disoriented. "She manufactured every single one," I said, sitting across from him. "Every moment of confusion, every stumble, every forgotten name, she was either lying about them or she caused them herself by drugging my coffee." His head snapped up. "Drugging. David found the medication in her purse. Anti-anxiety pills that cause confusion and memory problems in elderly people. She'd been slipping them into my morning coffee for weeks. Marcus broke down completely. She told me you were hiding money from us, planning to leave everything to charity out of spite. She said you'd never forgiven me for moving away, for not visiting enough after Dad got sick. I pulled out Robert's letters, the ones he'd written but never given me. Your father was proud of you, Marcus. He worried about your priorities, but he loved you. He even set aside money to help you buy your own home when you were ready to settle down. Marcus read his father's words, tears streaming down his face. I threw it all away for her, didn't I? The money, the house, and worst of all, my relationship with you. The money doesn't matter, I said quietly. But trust, once broken, is very hard to repair. My other children, Sarah from California and Michael from Texas, had finally arrived, horrified by what they'd learned. They stood in the doorway, looking at their brother with a mixture of pity and disgust. How could you do this to Mom? Sarah asked. How could you let that woman abuse her in her own home? Marcus had no answer. He'd been so blinded by Jessica's manipulation and his own greed that he'd lost sight of everything that mattered. I want to make this right, he said finally. I'll testify against Jessica. I'll return everything she took. I'll do whatever it takes. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw both the boy I'd raised and the man he'd chosen to become. Making it right starts with accepting responsibility for your choices, Marcus. Jessica may have manipulated you, but you chose to believe her lies because they justified what you wanted to do anyway. When Marcus begged me to lie to the police to protect Jessica, I knew my son was truly lost to me, but I also knew exactly what I had to do to protect the family he had tried to destroy. 6 weeks later, I stood in a courtroom and told my story. The judge listened with growing anger as I detailed Jessica's systematic abuse, her theft, her forgeries, and her plan to have me falsely committed. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said, can you tell the court how this experience has affected you? I looked directly at Jessica, who sat at the defendant's table with her court-appointed attorney. Her designer clothes and perfect makeup couldn't hide the calculating coldness in her eyes. Your Honor, this woman didn't just try to steal my money or my house, I said clearly. She tried to steal my identity, my dignity, and my freedom. She targeted me because she thought I was weak and vulnerable after my husband's death. She was wrong. Jessica's defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive old woman seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. Mrs. Chen testified about Jessica's verbal abuse. David presented financial records showing the theft. Other victims came forward, describing identical patterns of manipulation and exploitation. Marcus testified reluctantly, admitting his role in the conspiracy while trying to minimize his responsibility. I was manipulated, he claimed. I thought I was helping my mother. But the recordings told a different story, recordings of him laughing with Jessica about my supposed confusion, of him agreeing to sign commitment papers, of him helping her research my financial assets. My other children testified too, expressing their shame at Marcus's actions and their pride in my strength. Sarah's voice shook with emotion as she described arriving to find their mother isolated and terrorized in her own home. When the judge delivered Jessica's sentence, 5 years for elder abuse and fraud, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. But Marcus received only probation and community service, despite his role in the conspiracy. The system, it seemed, was reluctant to send a son to prison for betraying his mother, even when the evidence was clear. As the judge read Jessica's sentence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace, but the real test of my healing was waiting for me outside the courthouse. Marcus approached me on the courthouse steps, his face haggard and defeated. Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but you're right, I said quietly. You don't deserve it, but forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need to heal. I looked at my eldest child, the baby I'd carried and loved and sacrificed for, and made the hardest decision of my life. I forgive you, Marcus, but I don't trust you. And until you can prove that you've learned something from this experience, we can't have a relationship. He nodded, tears in his eyes. What can I do? Get therapy. Figure out why you were so quick to believe I was incompetent, so eager to take control of my life. Learn to see elderly people, including your own mother, as human beings deserving of respect, not obstacles to your inheritance. Over the following months, something unexpected happened. Other families began reaching out to me, desperate for help with their own elder abuse situations. David connected me with advocacy groups, and I found myself with a new purpose. I started speaking at senior centers about the warning signs of financial exploitation. I helped other families navigate the legal system when their elderly relatives were being targeted by predators. I discovered that my experience, as painful as it had been, could help protect others. My house began to feel like home again. I removed every trace of Jessica's presence, reclaimed my spaces, and filled them with photos of the people who truly cared about me. Sarah, Michael, Mrs. Chen, David, and the many seniors I'd helped over the months. Marcus kept his distance, but he did start therapy. Occasionally, he'd send a letter updating me on his progress, asking nothing in return. It wasn't enough to rebuild our relationship, but it was a start. 6 months later, when I received an unexpected visitor at my door, I realized my story of survival had inspired something I never could have imagined. The young woman on my doorstep looked terrified and desperate. She introduced herself as Amanda, a social worker from 3 states away. "Mrs. Whitmore, I know this is unusual, but I've been following your case. My grandmother is in a situation very similar to what you experienced, and I don't know how to help her." Amanda's grandmother was being isolated and manipulated by her nephew and his girlfriend, who had convinced her to sign over power of attorney and were systematically draining her accounts while convincing the family she was developing dementia. "They're planning to move her to a facility next week," Amanda said, crying. "She's scared and confused, but when I try to talk to other family members, they say I'm being paranoid, that John and his girlfriend are just trying to help." I invited Amanda in and made tea with my grandmother's china, the set I'd saved from Jessica's greed. As we talked, I realized that my painful experience had given me something valuable: the knowledge to help others recognize and fight elder abuse. Over the next few months, Amanda and I worked with David and Detective Rodriguez to build a case that saved her grandmother from a fate similar to what Jessica had planned for me. We documented the financial exploitation, gathered evidence of emotional abuse, and connected Amanda's grandmother with legal resources that protected her assets and her freedom. But Amanda's grandmother wasn't the only one who reached out. Letters started arriving from around the country, sometimes around the world, from people who had heard my story and found the courage to stand up against family members who were exploiting their elderly relatives. I established a support network with Mrs. Chen and David, creating resources for families dealing with elder abuse. We organized workshops, created information packets, and built a phone tree of advocates who could respond quickly when someone needed help. Marcus continued his therapy and community service, slowly learning to see the damage he'd caused, not just to me but to himself. He started volunteering at a senior center, working with elderly people who reminded him daily of the mother he'd betrayed. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself," he wrote in one of his letters, "but I'm trying to become the man Dad raised me to be, the man you deserved as a son." I kept his letters in Robert's desk drawer, alongside the love letters my husband had written, but never given me. Someday, maybe Marcus and I could rebuild something from the ashes of our relationship, but it would be on my terms, when I was ready, and only if he proved he'd truly changed. My house became a gathering place for the community I'd built: elder advocates, social workers, other survivors of family abuse. The rooms that Jessica had tried to claim as her own were filled with laughter, planning sessions, and the quiet conversations of people healing from trauma. Robert's crystal vase, carefully repaired with golden seams that made it more beautiful than it had been when whole, sat prominently on the mantel. It reminded me daily that being broken doesn't mean being destroyed. Sometimes it means being remade into something stronger. On quiet evenings, I'd sit in Robert's chair, reading his letters and feeling his presence in the house he'd built to protect me. His foresight had saved my freedom, but my own strength had saved my dignity. Jessica was serving her sentence in a state prison, finally paying for the pain she'd caused, not just to me, but to all her victims. Her lawyer friend had been disbarred and faced his own criminal charges. The doctor who had signed my commitment papers without ever meeting me had lost his license. Justice had been served, but more importantly, other vulnerable seniors were being protected by the network we'd built from the ashes of my own trauma. If my story has reached you tonight, please know that you are stronger than those who would tear you down. Hit that like button if you believe every senior deserves dignity and respect. Subscribe to hear more stories of survival and justice. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Your voice matters, and together we can protect the vulnerable and hold the cruel accountable. From my heart to yours, wherever you are in this world. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power. I sit now in my restored living room, surrounded by photos of my children Sarah and Michael, my advocates David and Mrs. Chen, and the many seniors I've helped protect from predators like Jessica. Sunlight streams through windows that Jessica once measured for her own gain, illuminating the crystal vase on my mantel, more beautiful for having been broken and made whole again. The house Robert built with his own hands remains mine, protected by his love and defended by my own newfound strength. In the drawer of his desk, alongside his letters of protection and love, I keep the letters from people around the world who found courage in my story to fight their own battles against those who would exploit and abuse the vulnerable. I am Eleanor Whitmore. I am 67 years old. I am a survivor, an advocate, and a reminder that it's never too late to stand up to those who would steal your dignity, your freedom, or your life. And every morning when I wake up in the house that is truly mine, I remember Robert's words, "You're the strongest person I've ever known." He was right. I just needed to remember it myself. Dadji.